This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, and Brewers Outlet. Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Brewers Outlet, Sunbury Motor Company, and Purdy Insurance. Now, from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Brought to you by Purdy Insurance, Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com. Auto, home, life, business, boat, motorcycle, RV. Multitude of insurance needs. Purdy Insurance keeps it all organized for you, and at the same time, the great people at Purdy Insurance do everything they can to save you money. No doubt, Purdy Insurance. Market Street in Sunbury, go to purdyinsurance.com. Get going today with John Sauber, Sunday Daily Times. John, always a pleasure. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me on, Steve. I always appreciate it.
Never a dull moment, and for Penn State football, never a dull moment. James Franklin met with the media. What was your immediate take out of what you heard?
Yeah, he seemed pretty refreshed, right? Like this was a very long season for everybody, and he seemed kind of geared up and ready to go and get going into winter workouts here soon, and then eventually spring ball. But yeah, I thought he seemed refreshed. He was in a good mood. It can, like I said, things can drag out, and that's not always the case for everyone. But the biggest thing that he said, I think, was about the running backs coach job, that they're kind of looking for that immediate return on investment, right? That they want the kind of candidate that is going to be not necessarily too far from the biggest upswing of their career. They don't want to have to kind of develop someone for a year and then see the dividends in year two, but they also don't want someone that is, kind of done it before but is on the downswing a little bit. So I think they're trying to find someone that is going to maximize Katron Allen, Nick Singleton next year. That may seem obvious, but it's obviously very important given that there's a chance that Penn State comes in the next season as the number one team in the country, and those two backs will be a big part of the reason why.
What about the part where, because of the way the schedule played out and how late they played, that in the end, instead of maybe 8 to 10 of these winter workouts, that they're going to probably end up doing 6?
Yeah, I think it's smart, right? Like, there might be some guys down the depth chart that maybe need a little more, and I guess you could justify going to 8 to 10 if you're kind of not doing it for everyone. But then how do you kind of say that to the roster, like half of them only have to do 6, half only have to do 8 to 10. But I think doing 6 is smart given that the season went so late, and then spring ball is going to be later, winter workouts themselves are going to be later, and all of it's going to push even closer to fall camp. And so there's just going to be less downtime for the team this year. And there are so many known commodities on this roster, pretty much across the board, that I don't think they have to do some of these things that kind of let them know what they have. They can kind of, play the card that they've been dealt, which is a very talented roster that's going to have a little bit less time, and kind of roll from there and frankly be one of the best teams in the country without necessarily needing some of the drastic preparation that they may have needed in the past.
John, the House settlement is not quite to the finish line yet. There's still some work to be done between now and April 7th when Judge Claudia Wilken makes a ruling on it. The Trump administration did exactly what everybody expected they would do. The guidance that was put out by the Biden administration on the Friday before they left office, that it should be a 50-50 split because of Title IX, was reversed by the Trump administration this week. What is your thought on that, and where do you think it should be?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult discussion, right? Because as you said, we talked about this. I think it was right before it happened. It came on the show. Mm-hmm. I came on the show, and we talked about how the Biden administration had put that out there, and that we both kind of anticipated that it could be reversed. But yeah, it's frankly a tough discussion to have. I'm not a legal expert in these regards, right? But it's tough to it's tough to say exactly where it should be distributed because the revenue brought in by sports is different, right? And you have to take all of those things into account. while you do at the same time want to make sure that everyone is getting a fair share of these things for what they are bringing in. And that's not just on a team-by-team basis. That's on an individual-by-individual basis. So I think it's a probably a more in-depth discussion than can be had, right, in the segment that we have here. But I think it is something that is worth monitoring and will impact, Penn State football and Penn State men's basketball, Penn State wrestling, all of Penn State's women's sports, and everything else moving forward.
Yeah, it's interesting because, look, there are only two non-football or men's basketball programs in the Big Ten that actually turned a profit in fiscal year 2024, and that would be Minnesota men's ice hockey and Nebraska women's volleyball. All the other ones outside of football and men's basketball lost money, yes, including Iowa women's basketball. To me, that's a statement unto itself in some ways.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think, some people would be surprised that Penn State wrestling's not in that group too, right? Like I think people would be surprised by the financial state of college athletics in general when you really dive into the numbers of it and what's profitable and what isn't. Some of that, of course, is the allocation of the media rights money going to specific sports and everything like that. But yeah, I think, it's a situation where, again, you want that money to be distributed to who is earning it and who is deserving of it, but it's also tough to base that just on, the revenue brought in, because some of those things necessarily aren't in those teams' control, right? Like, is it those teams' fault that they have to go to the West Coast and suddenly those trips are drastically more expensive than they ever thought, and suddenly that's, it's more damaging for the smaller programs? I don't know. And so it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it is interesting, although when they talk about media allocation, that's actually pretty simple because there are only two sports that are on Fox Sports 1, only two sports that are on Fox, only two sports that are on Peacock, only two sports that are on CBS, and that's it. That's why the media allocation is the way it is.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And so, you look at that, and then it's, are you giving all the money to only these two sports, right? Like, is it just football and men's basketball that gets it? And I don't think that is necessarily a tenable situation either.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying when it comes to people talking about the media allocation, why is it on these lines? Well, it's on these lines for a reason, because only BTN is the one that carries other sports. That's it. Women's basketball for Iowa was on TV on Fox several times last year, but, that's that school. So I'm just talking from a common sense point of view. People don't like when I do that, but that's just, I'm not going to change. So why would I? So John, let's get to back to football here for a moment. I think that I know what your answer is pretty much going to be, but when they do finally get around to spring practice, what to you are the priorities with this team?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is making sure everybody is comfortable in Jim Knowles' defense and everybody is healthy, right? Like, I think those are the two biggest, tent poles for this offseason for Penn State in general, right? Like, not just spring ball, I think fall camp. Knowles has been described to me as like a mad scientist and a creative genius by people close to him. And
yes,
I think all of that applies when you watch, the All-22 film. You can see everything he's kind of trying to do and doing successfully, quite frankly, most of the time. And it requires everyone, all 11 on the field, being on the same page, right? I've compared him to Vic Fangio in the past, and then obviously we saw how that turned out on Sunday, right, when you can kind of play that way, when you can be a step ahead a little bit and stress out an opposing quarterback in that way. And I think Knowles tries to do a lot of those same things with the way he disguises coverages, the way he disguises blitzes, and kind of just makes life difficult for opposing offenses. But again, all that requires the entire defense to know what it's doing, to rotate at the exact same time, to pass off coverages and zone at the exact same time, to pass off opponents, and zone coverage at the exact same time. And so it has to be, some defenses are kind of more connected than others, right? Some are just about having more talent, winning your one-on-one, going out and dominating. There have been Penn State defenses that have excelled doing that in the past. This is about having a level of, of schematic knowledge that you have an advantage on every play that Knowles gives you, and being able to take advantage of that. And then, of course, the health thing is for every team in the country, but especially when you're as good as Penn State football is. You want to be able to get into spring ball, get the reps you need, get out healthy, and move on.
There's another part, too, to this, and that this will be for Jim to adjust to. What's the language that you want to use with what you call on defense? There's been a way Penn State's called its defenses under Brent, how they called it under Manny, how they called it under Tom. There's a lot of the same that's in there. Is Jim the one that has to adapt language-wise, or is it the other way around?
I would guess it would end up being Jim that does that. We talked to Andy Kotelnicki a lot last year about this type of thing, and he mentioned that, it's easy for one guy to make that change rather than an entire group of assistant coaches and analysts and an entire roster of players, to make those changes. It's easier to, when you have overlap in something, when you have something that's called differently, just to go with whatever Penn State called it in the past, right? And that allows, Knowles only has to relearn it instead of the entire team does. And I think that makes for an easier transition. I don't know that for certain that's what they'll do, but it's what they did with Kotelnicki in the past.
Right.
It's what they've done with other coaches in the past. And I think that will probably make things the smoothest for Penn State this year.
John, what is your view on Ja'Juan Seider, A, going to Notre Dame, and B, now the search for Penn State for a running back coach?
Yeah, it caught me a little off guard, mostly because it's Super Bowl Sunday, right? I think everyone solely focused on one thing on Sunday. But I'm not, it's not the most surprising departure in the world. Sometimes you're just somewhere for a long time and, changes of scenery happen. I do think he's one of the best running backs coaches in the country. There's no doubt about that. But I also tend to believe that James Franklin is going to hire one of the best running backs coaches in the country, or at least is in position to do that, right? We'll evaluate that when that kind of comes through and with whoever it is. But for the time being, they have all of the resources they need to compete at the highest level, not just in the Big Ten, but in all of college football. That was, I think, proven to everyone pretty resoundingly with Jim Knowles and the fact that Penn State was able to get him. And I would anticipate that James Franklin's able to go get his ideal candidate. Just who that is yet, we don't know. But, there are good running backs coaches out there that, like I mentioned earlier, are at that cross-section of being, not past their prime, but also young enough to be, have room for growth, but still be at an extremely high level right now. And I think, in all likelihood, he will end up getting one of those types of guys.
When it comes to Jim Knowles, and I'm going to apply this to the running back job, and I would just get your thought on this. James, I felt like, identified the person he felt was the best candidate, right, on his board, and he was allowed to go get him. Is that the same thing with the run? A, do you think that way as well? And B, does that then apply to this running back job?
Yeah, I think so. I think he was able to identify, and there were twists and turns in that process, and maybe it didn't seem like Knowles would be that guy early, and then James was able to identify, number two and try and go get them, and they kind of had the resources to get who he thought was the prime candidate. And I would expect that's the case with the running backs coach job too, right? I think they're in position to target who they want to target and kind of operate like I think a lot of people want Penn State football to operate, right? Like they are one of the best programs in the country. Like they have the financial resources to behave that way and go get the best, whether that's coaches, portal players, high school recruits, that they're able to attract the most talent possible to join the program and get the level of coach necessary to win a national title.
There's also a day where you had an opportunity to talk to the freshmen who are transitioning to either redshirt freshmen or sophomores. What were your takes from that?
Yeah, it was interesting listening to Corey Smith and Quentin Martin, right? Like those are the two guys that were obviously very impacted by Sunday's news, and they both seemed a little surprised that it happened, but understood that it was a business decision. And both seemed at the time committed to Penn State. Obviously, things can change, with spring ball and everything like that. But both didn't seem to sway in their belief. Both expressed belief in James Franklin that he will make the right hire, which they don't really have any reason not to believe that. You see some guys like Cooper Cousins who looks fully ready to play football right now and pretty much said as much. Like he loves it so much he doesn't really necessarily enjoy taking breaks from it. It's what he wants to be doing at all times. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is those two running backs, the spotlight is kind of immediately on them with the immediacy of speaking to them 2 days after their position coach leaves. But yeah, it's an impressive group and a bunch of guys that I think will see bigger roles this season.
What's also interesting is for Penn State is the spring transfer portal. The spring transfer portal, Penn State's going to play the blue-white game April 26th. The spring transfer portal opens up on the 15th, right? And it goes, to the 29th, I think. That's a very interesting time, especially now that rosters, and let's face it, most people are going to use scholarships to get to 105.
Yeah, no, I think it is going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. You mentioned that's 11 days of Penn State is in the middle of spring ball and the portal's open. It's hard to say that there won't be guys that are in the middle of spring ball and decide to enter the portal. I'm sure Penn State will do its best to try and get everyone to hold off until the 27th or 28th and let them get through all the way through spring ball. But James Franklin likes to have those meetings with guys, to assess their progress. It's a lot harder to do that when the portal closes, the Tuesday after your spring game. And so I'll be curious to see how he handles that and how he handles kind of the roster maintenance part of it. But at the same time, they're also going to be looking for guys in the portal, right? I continue to believe that wide receiver is a position that they'll target, even though they brought two guys in Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross, that I think are going to be at the very least contributors this year, if not starters. And so I think that kind of dynamic is going to be one of the more fascinating things to watch play out, because they're kind of in a spot where they have to try and keep these guys within the program while practice is still going on, while still coaching them out on the practice field and playing in the spring game and getting all that organized, which could look different this year too. And at the same time, trying to find guys that they think can help the team win a national title this year.
What's it like for you covering the sport the way it is set up now?
Exhausting. It's nonstop, right? It's unbelievable. I think I've mentioned on here before, I'm a big Eagles fan, so obviously Sunday was great for me. But the Jim Knowles news on a NFC title game Sunday, the J1 Sider news on a Super Bowl Sunday was less than ideal. But you get to this time of year and you think you have a little bit of a break here after James and the freshmen speak, and all of a sudden there's a running backs coach search, right? And here winter workouts are starting soon, and I'm sure every year we usually talk to Chuck Losey at the end of winter workouts, and that presumably will happen again this year. And then all of a sudden you're at spring ball, right? And all of a sudden it's pro day, and the draft ends on the same Saturday as the blue-white game this year. And so you just kind of stare at May and hope that you can make it. It's one of those things that up until this past weekend, I don't know that I had a day off in months, but that's part of the gig. It's a lot of fun. It can be exhausting at times, but you kind of roll with the punches.
And of course, I know how much you love basketball. It's obviously been a tough run at this point. They've got Washington coming up. What's your thought on where they are?
Yeah, it's just, it's kind of surreal, right? Like, I was talking in December, this is a team that I thought was an NCAA tournament team that, just had to kind of take care of business against the mediocre and bottom teams of the Big Ten, and suddenly they're the ones at the bottom of the conference. I did not anticipate this bottoming out as poorly as it did, but it's also it feels like the train is fully off the tracks now, and that you think you hit rock bottom and you find another way to take a step down. And so it feels like the program kind of just needs the reset of the end of the year. This might sound crazy, but I don't know that making the Big Ten tournament would even be good for them at this point. I think it could do more harm than good. They just kind of got to get to the end of the year, the reset. You got to get to the portal, try and fill needs, and go from there. Because right now, you hate to say it, but on February 12th, but it all kind of seems like a lost cause. There's no real upside to this. There's no salvaging it at this point, and even if you salvage it, half of your main contributors are gone after this year anyways. And with the Big Ten tournament no longer being a guarantee, and frankly at this point looking unlikely for Penn State, I think you just kind of got to hope for the best and try and get to that point where you can reset after this year and move forward to next year. I think that also includes, what we're seeing a little bit in playing some of those younger guys more, guys like Dominic Stewart, who I think has earned a bigger role, Miles Goodman too, and we'll see if that keeps trending that way. But yeah, this has been incredibly surprising to me, and not something I anticipated even a month ago when this kind of streak started.
John, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, and we covered a lot of ground.
Thanks for having me on, Steve. Always appreciate it.
John Sauber, Sunday Daily Times, does great work. This half hour being brought to you by our good friends at Purdy Insurance, Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com. Auto, home, light business, boat, motorcycle, RV. Multitude of insurance needs. Those are just some of them. They organize all of them, make sure you're fully insured, and not only that, they do everything they can to save you money. It's all at Purdy Insurance, Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com here on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
What is a tradition of trust? It's more than just words. It's a promise that when you walk into Sunbury Motors Ford, you're not just another customer, you're family. It's 110 years of handshakes that mean something, of fair deals, honest service, and putting you first. And right now, that means huge savings on the Ford you want. Pick from 35 new Ford Escapes with savings up to $7,700, starting at $24,915. Or choose from 32 new Ford Bronco Sports, discounted up to $7,000, priced as low as $28,935. Need power? We've got 51 new Ford F-150s, slashed up to $12,616, starting at $45,974. Plus, take up to $10,000 off new Ford Broncos and a massive $13,000 off new Ford Expeditions. Sunbury Motors Ford in the North 4th Street Auto Plaza and at sunburymotors.com. Sunbury Motor Company, a tradition of trust since 1915.